So I had a lot of fun with this video. I put a lot of time into it. And I think personally that this is one of the most important things in poker. It's not really about what most people think, finding the exact right strategy to play. Maybe even just playing a GTO strategy. I think in tournaments that it is much more important to be focused and tuned in onto the different types of players and their tendencies and finding ways to exploit them. So, what I did over the first few years of playing poker is I just tried to figure it out, and this is basically what I came up with. And yeah, I'm just going to jump into it. This is my player types and tendencies video. Let's see if this goes smooth. Okay, there we go. So, my goals with this video are to give you a better understanding of the different player types, how to approach them, how others might approach you potentially, or if they're even adjusting to you. A better understanding of who may be more or less profitable to play against. So understanding better situations than other, basically. Also helping us create better plans by assuming the player's tendencies, what they will or won't do. We will make plays and assumptions from there. And also, if you are good and once you kind of understand the system and the player types and how it works, it'll allow for you to make quicker decisions by being able to associate players with certain colors, and in those instances you can a lot faster once you're trained know, all right, well, I'm going to play this guy this way, so I'm going to c-bet, I'm not going to c-bet. Things like that. And then I have here, looks like some key thoughts, just a couple of brief things I'll skim through. Hole cards matter much less than you think. Know who you are, know who you're up against, recognize table dynamics, and when using HUD stats, need a decent sample. Poker will continue to evolve as Pokemon do, and I know I haven't really talked about Pokemon. For those of you who have no idea what Pokemon is, I'm going to make a relation to poker and Pokemon. So give you a little background. Pokemon is this cartoon of a bunch of little basically animals around the world that all possess different abilities. And for instance, there's these water Pokemon. Their attacks that they use in battle are water based, and they of course are weak against well, not of course, but water Pokemon are weak against grass Pokemon, and water Pokemon are strong against fire Pokemon. Obviously, water puts out fire, and fire burns grass, so fire is strong against grass Pokemon. So there's some basic ones. There's water, fire, grass, electricity ones, which obviously the electricity ones do well against water. Kind of all very relatable things to our lives, and this kind of just puts it in a really cool sense. And they go into battle, and before you go into battle, in the cartoon episodes, sometimes they'll have a little bit of an idea of what type of opponent they're up against. Most of the time they do, actually. So for instance, I I actually just started watching these again. I don't know, it kind of puts me in the zone. It's weird. But I started watching, and there was an episode where there was this lightning guy that he had to beat. So he already knew that his Pokemon were lightning Pokemon. So the most logical approach would to play a rock Pokemon, which doesn't really get affected by the lightning. Or it would have been also bad to have played against the lightning one, to have played like a water Pokemon. So basically, when I'm relating these different types of Pokemon strengths and weaknesses, I'm basically identifying a strategy. And now we're going to relate that to poker, because there's definitely certain types of Pokermon, different player types with different strengths and weaknesses, and they can be exploited or defeated more optimally by different types of strategies. So we aren't going to go into every hand and play every single villain the exact same way. We're going to make adjustments depending on how we think what type of poker they are or what their strengths are. So I'm going to identify now the player types that I have created through my system, and the color right here, Sir Limsalot, a loose passive station, or a loose passive just calls, 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 in case you don't understand the term station. So I have them tagged yellow, so I will often, once I identify this player, tag them yellow so I can very easily, whether I have 6 games up or 10 games or 2 games, whatever the case may be, once I get a real strong read that, okay, I want to tag this guy as a yellow and play him as a yellow, once I do that, then I'll be able to look between my games and see like, oh, this yellow guy just 3-bet me. Okay, maybe I'll just let it go, perhaps. So now, I dug into it more and I really started to think about it at a time, and I was like, I feel like there is a connection between a playing style and perhaps even a mentality of the person behind the keyboard. And not that they maybe live their lives like their real lives like this all the time, but it kind of more so relates to the stage in poker they're at. So the mentality of this yellow loose passive type player is they're probably a recreational player who enjoys playing the game they see on TV so often. They rarely complain or care too much about losing. They probably care even less about learning. So I think we've all been in this stage, and as I go through these too, there is going to be a connection to where I think this is the first stage I think most people start off in, is, call, see flops, try to hit, and go from there. And we don't think about learning, we just think it's luck and then see what happens. Okay, so that's the first player that I want to identify. Now the green tag player, the tight aggressive nit, and nit just basically says that they just play their cards. If they have it, they have it. If they don't have it, they let go of it. Very straightforward type of player. Now the mentality I think that this person carries in their thought process or behind the scenes that kind of drives the way they play is I assume that this is, a smart and conservative person in real life. They aren't just going in, gambling. We've all seen those guys. They found a way to beat the game and are happy with that. They're not losing. They're just beating it, and they're okay with that. It's a lower stress strategy, of course, when you're not playing a bunch of hands, and it can be comforting, and you can just sit around and wait for the luck to happen. But they're probably happy making it in the money more so. They rarely shoot for the fences. And so, yeah, like I said, when they come with it, they have it. They typically avoid confrontation. Now, actually, this one is a little bit out of order. I'm going to go, there we go. This is the stage that I think typically will stem next. Whether you start off recreational as a yellow, then you start to get a little bit more, you're like, okay, you're playing too many hands, then you eventually at some point go, okay, how should I play pre-flop? And then you turn into the tight aggressive guy, the green guy, or the nit some people can go to. And past that, maybe those people eventually at some point get to a spot where they are not happy with just playing a tight aggressive strategy, and they know that they need to start being aggressive because either they have been told by a friend, or they are learning and growing actively with the game, or they just start to realize that they're getting exploited by the aggressive guys. So now, okay, I need to be aggressive back. They take that step into the next stage, and this is what I would like to define that stage as, is the orange tag player who is mixed with the yellow loose passive and the red. And I have over aggro here, but that's maybe a bit too aggressive of a description. I would just like to say more controlled aggro. So the combination of that player will yield a style that still has a lot of calling, not folding, trying to hit flops, mixed with now I'm also raising a bit and 3-betting more. So typically what I find happens is that there are people who raise and don't fold too much because now they're seeing flops and raising a wider range, but don't want to get exploited, and now they don't really know how to be aggressive, so they end up being a bad aggressive, which is essentially what this tag is insinuating at first, even though there are people who can seem to play a bad aggressive strategy but can still be thinking. So we'll kind of touch on that later. But the general population. They let me see if I've covered this. I didn't even read. They see the benefits of being aggro, have a lot of time for poker, but maybe don't care about money as much, which is why they're not as conservative. Uh, and they can afford to spew. I definitely think this player can do some spewy things, calling and raising, because they're not really sure which way to go with it on this kind of in-between stage. Some people get caught in the stage for a while too, but and then yeah, this is another thing. I think they're quick to get on other people or blame other people for their mistakes. So you can kind of a little tell there. Typically, if I see people spewing off or being rude in chat, I'm kind of going to assume that they've got like a hot button that's relatively close to the surface. So now we have the red tag player who is loose aggressive and has a bit more control over their aggression. They've advanced past the stages we've already discussed and now are really starting to hone in their aggression to a point where you really need to find other ways to exploit them. So in this person now is starting to have an aggressive approach. They see the value in taking over the control of situations and being in control, and being aggressive is the preferred route. And it can also be more fun, but when generally presented with the opportunity to be aggressive, they will take it. Okay? And I think a lot of people, if they seem to be decent or good regs, for me, they're going to fall into that red category. Now, this purple tag is, I have Maniac here, which again is an aggressive description, I'd say. But this is what most people would refer to as a donkey. And I basically see them as players who like to gamble. They're playing poker for that high and sucking out and winning big pots, but they lack the patience to wait for those big situations to win those big pots. So they're always trying to press the action, see flops, and just do things that basically fall outside of the player types that we've already described. Very super gambly. They typically play way more pots than anybody else. And yeah, there seems to be a real disconnect between any sort of solid poker principles as far as strategy goes versus just getting lucky. And yeah, so this is a tag that I don't put often because usually I feel like we can tag them otherwise, but there are definitely some people who are just really gambly, and sometimes it's nice to have this color code on them and know how we can adjust. So, if you know anything about Pokemon, you know the main character is Pikachu, and he can beat anyone. He adjusts, eventually gets there, and I think that is the baby blue here, which titled Shark, the thinking players, the winners who continue to perform, and these are the players who I think can be any one of these other player types that I've already described to you. Not because they necessarily want to or they stay there, it's just because they can mix up their game. And if they need to be a little bit tighter at a certain table, they can. If they need to be a little bit looser calling and not raising, they can do that as well. But typically these types of players are going to know why they're doing what they're doing. They're not limping or just calling because they're a yellow type player. They probably have a little bit more of a reason behind it, so we have to be careful around these people because they're not playing a very straight up strategy. They can also sometimes be that seemingly like that orange type player. They might be at a table that they think they can be really loose passive, play a lot of pots, and that's why I think it's important to identify who the solid winners and thinkers are, because then we know these are the players who we're going to have to be a little bit more careful around and cautious, because they might be able to see through some of the things that we're doing. And so yeah, this is our goal here. And by the time people get to this point, I feel like their patience has really been matured. They can take their time. They can adjust. They're not afraid of ego battles and things like that. Typically, it's just a much more solid professional, almost, I would say, in the game. All right. So now we've identified the players that I want to discuss. And now, how can we exploit them? What are their flaws? And this is a sheet that I put up. And I have the numbers next to the name symbolize a general trend that I see in the HUD stats, the average, if you're using a HUD, and I have a decent enough sample on them, and I maybe have a bunch of games up, I'll look at their HUD stats, and if I see 39, 3, 2, or 20, 2, 2, or something like that, basically there is a big gap between their VPIP and PFR, which is basically the pots that they're playing and the pots that they come in raising. So you could see right here the 39 3. They're not raising a ton, but they're playing a bunch of pots, which means they're probably just calling, trying to hit, and then giving up. And then this is the, as we transition through the slides, they're playing still a high amount of hands, but you can see this person has transitioned is now is raising more, okay? And then even 3-betting a little bit more. But there's still a big gap between here, which means they're probably calling too much along with their aggression, and it leads to a lot of leaks happening. And here is the green player that we discussed, 10-8-3. You can see that, and now today's games have gotten a bit more aggressive. A tag or a tighter player could very easily be playing like 14-12. These are kind of just averages to kind of draw on to the point I'm making. Excuse me. So you can see not that big of a gap between the hands that they're coming and raising and playing. They're exposing themselves to a lot less confrontation in bad situations. And then aggressive, raising a lot more, not calling as much. And then here is the gambler playing way too many pots, raising too many, just all over the place. Just it is probably, this is going to be an aggressive description, but pretty close to impossible to play a 70, 45, 15, or anything even like 50% of hands, 40% of hands. It's going to be extremely tough to play that profitably and to make money. And then here for the thinking player, as far as the HUD stats go, I put question marks because I've seen solid winning thinking players play a tight aggressive strategy that's like 14, 12, 8. I've seen winners play 27, 24, 10, and I've actually even seen some winners play a more of a limpy type style. It's super rare, but the point is we need to figure out if they're thinking, shark scope them, see if they're winning, look at their pocket fives, and then kind of once we figure that out, I'm going to, if it's a convincing number, then I'll give them credit for thinking. But okay, so some signs that they are one of these players I put in white here, but so the yellow type, more passive recreational players tend to like to open limp, and the exploitation is to isolate them, raise them, put the pressure on them, and a lot of time they're going to be folding the C-bets or double barrels post flop. So they leave themselves vulnerable there. And then along with that, they limp fold a lot. Now, typically this limp folding isn't going to happen early stages of a tournament when they're deep, like if they're limping a pocket pair or some sort of suited hand. They still have plenty of chips to call, so they're not going to be folding all that much, but once it becomes middle and late stages of the game, this is a great opponent to attack around bubbles when they're limping, on shorter stacks, because at that point, once they're a bit more emotionally invested in tournaments, they're going to be folding a lot more. They overplay big hands since they don't play or come in raising a lot. When they hit, they typically tend to overvalue one pair of hands, two pair of hands, and not try to get fancy, just try to not get sucked out on. And then another tell here is the standard open can tend to be 3x with these players a good bit. All right, so going down, we have the orange tag player, who I've already mentioned this, but they don't change gears well. They'll spew, so you can not worry about being balanced a lot against these guys. It's not like they're reading into us too much. They're just playing their hands, and they either don't believe you, and it's not that advanced of a thinking typically. Ranges are often more wider, like I already said. So we can play and 3-bet them wider and expect that they're going to be in a lot tougher situations because they choose to not fold post-flop or pre-flop and then getting into post-flop. And then here, again, I've already kind of hit on this. They tend to think that you're making a play a lot of the time, so there's a lot more situations where we can be betting and getting them to fold or getting them to call. Now, let's go to the purple guy here at the bottom. Already mentioned this, ready to gamble for their stack, ready to see flops, and very inconsistent with their play. Now, the aggressive guy, this is some things to look out for, guy or girl. They open a lot of pots unopened in position, so typically in late position, they're going to be in position the most. So when it gets to them, they're going to be opening a lot just because they understand the value of being aggressive. And they tend, like I said before, tend to want to be in control of the hand. They also view passive lines as opportunities. Again, I mentioned that if we give them an opportunity to be aggressive, typically they will. So seeing other players limp or somebody raising too much and they're 3-betting on them, they could be taking an aggressive exploitation route. So we at times can exploit that. And given the fact that they are an aggressive player, now this big ego, I think, will be relevant also in the orange tag, as I'd mentioned. But in some of these aggressive guys, they're going to not want to get exploited. If somebody continues to 3-bet them, they're going to be the type of person who's going to start to 4-bet light if it happens too much. Or they're going to be the player of all of these players, except for maybe the Thinkings, the Baby Blues, to be able to continue to apply pressure. So you really have to have good counter strategies against these guys so that they're not putting you in bad situations all the time. Or, and when I say counter strategy, that could also be just avoiding them. It just really depends. And then now down to the tighter player. They primarily are playing their cards. They play solid pre-flop, and they preserve their stack well. That's some reads on that you can get on them. And of course, on the other side, that if they're playing their cards face up, then we can get reads easier. We can hand read better and not be in situations where we should be calling them off too light at times. They don't like playing out of position. That's very nerve-wracking. Understandably, it should be to a point. And they won't look to be getting in big confrontations. And then now, as far as the thinking players go, like I've mentioned, I believe they adjust well, they think ahead, and they understand different player types. So really understanding how they perceive you to be, which I mentioned before, know yourself. These types of players, for instance, let's just say, assume that I'm the peekahoo or the shark. In this instance, if I see a yellow tag guy limp, then, okay, I'm going to isolate this guy. I know I'm going to c-bet almost all the time, and if it's a wet board and they just call, I'm going to be double barreling because they're going to look to protect their hands a lot of the times, so we're going to be folding to them. If it's an aggressive guy who is opening late position a lot, I'm going to be 3-betting them light to get them to shut down or check raising their c-bets. So again, the blue tag, we're thinking ahead, we have a plan, we're adjusting to different player types, and we typically know how we are being viewed, what our image is. Alright, so now that we have an idea about the player types and trends and ways to exploit them, now I want to kind of get into more of a Pokermon connection here. And as I already stated earlier, some players' general default strategy is going to be better against others. And what I've done is highlighted some matchups. Now, a red aggressive player is typically going to get the best of the passive guy for obvious reasons. They're going to be check calling, and you should already know that we're going to miss most flops. We're going to have to catch up, things like that. So red player is going to get the best of the yellow player most of the time. The green player is going to typically get the best of the yellow player, I'd say, because the yellow guy is still going to be calling and with a wider range trying to hit flops, while the green guy is going to be playing a tighter range and going to typically have the edge against the yellow guy and not going to be paying off the yellow guy as often when they do hit. Now, I put yellow versus orange as a favorable matchup just because the orange guys don't adjust well. So against the yellow guys who could just check, shove, or try to value you, the orange guys aren't going to really be noticing that they're that type of player and making the adjustments they should. So the yellow guys can typically find more value against the orange type guys just because they're not going to believe them more, and they'll be able to get more value, I think. And also because I had to give the yellows at least one favorable matchup. So the red versus green, kind of like the red versus yellow, same thoughts. Orange versus green. Again, green is going to shy away from confrontation more often than not, which gives the orange aggressive players a bit of an edge. And then red versus orange. I give the edge to the red players because they have a more controlled aggression, and they're going to have the lead a lot more than the orange player, which is going to put them at an advantage. And then blue versus all, but blue. You know, you have two beasts clashing heads up. Typically, it could come down to the cards, variants, so it's kind of less of an edge there when you're playing shark versus shark, obviously. And so I just put blue versus all. Considering they can adjust to the players, they should be able to get the edge. And then now, of course, some less favorable matchups outside of just reversing the favorable ones. Of course, kind of we have our like break evens. Red versus red. You know, you're going to be playing a game of chicken. Blue versus blue is going to be, you know, spy versus spy type stuff. And then orange versus orange is kind of like the red versus red, except just who knows what's going to happen in that instance. They're going to be aggressive back and not believe each other. And then boring matchups. Yellow versus yellow. Green versus green. Kind of just with two types of styles that I assume play a bit more face up. There's not going to be too much creativity going on or fancy syndrome. Alright, so now people have talked about table flow and dynamics, and what I am trying to highlight here to give you a better understanding of that is the mix at a table. So let's say we have been playing on a network for a while. We're really good at taking notes and color coding people. Now we sit down at the table and we see first table, what I would call more of a standard mix. We're sitting here. We are the hero, and this is the Pokemon hero too. So we have to our left a tight, passive, passive, bad aggressive, passive aggressive, shark aggressive. Kind of a mix of all the player types. And now this is a table that I would have to attack accordingly. But now this passive mix table here, where I look and I see green, yellow, yellow, and orange across the table, yellow, unknown, yellow, and green. There's not a lot of aggressive colors at this table, so what I'm assuming is, okay, I could probably at this table open up my range a bit, c-bet, double barrel a good bit, and expect to be getting a ton of folds. So this is a table I would prefer to be playing a little bit more of an aggressive style against the assumed lineup here. And on the right, contrast, you could see we have a red, a blue, orange, red, one yellow, red, green, and then red. So typically, as you climb up in higher buy-ins, you'll see players who have adopted more of an aggressive strategy. This might be one of those tables, and you notice, okay, well, considering the style that we assume these red guys are, they're not just going to lay down to the raises. They're going to be 3-betting us way more than this table would. And this person's going to be a thinker. We're going to have to adjust accordingly to them. And so, as you can see, we can't be as aggressive at this table, or we need to be a different type of aggressive at this table than we might at this table. So again, now identifying the table flow, and also I think, you know, this is a table just in a very simple sense. If I'm looking at this, okay, these guys are going to fight back less, these guys are going to fight back more. So, you know, just looking at it that way, it says, okay, be more aggressive, be less aggressive. But it's really important, I think, just to be identifying the players at your table, understanding where you fit in and how you can exploit them. And this also should help give you an idea of how to put yourself in advantageous situations versus non. And that's going to put you so far in poker. If you're a couple of steps ahead of your opponents, already thinking what they're going to do, and you're planned already to the river in most situations, depending on board texture, you're going to be a step ahead of the game. The game is going to be so much easier. Yeah, I think... Okay, yeah. So that's another series I was working on. But yeah, that's the player types series. I hope it puts some light onto some things, and I hope that it helps everybody. But yeah, give me a shout, leave some comments if you'd like. But otherwise, I hope that y'all BODers enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing everybody crush.